Hello, this is Michael Hexter. Welcome to my Politics 2100 videocast here on YouTube. So this episode is a follow-up to the previous one where I was talking about the cult of the Deadly Phallus, America's gun fetish. So I'm calling this one Hidden Macroeconomic and Macroethical Dimensions of America's Gun Fetish. So I'm trying here to pull out or emphasize something that is often overlooked when people talk about gun control and the specific uh, issues around either pro or anti-gun ownership, or some kind of gun control is probably the best way to put it, and or Second Amendment fights over the interpretation of the Second Amendment. And I think, it's often the issue of gun control is often sectioned off from other political and economic issues as kind of a sort of special interest issue that people want to avoid. And unfortunately, it's something that is really foundational, I think, to American society. And I think to talk about economic issues, and particularly from a left perspective, in terms of demanding more accountability of government and more rights for workers and more income for people, in the middle and working classes, and for poor people, that those issues which are preferred, or sort of the comfortable terrain for the left, they tend to. I mean, most people who work in those areas are not pro-gun, or not pro-gun fetish, let's say, or the unfettered individual ownership of guns in the way that the NRA has advocated for it in the last 40 years. That still the issue is kind of only periodically addressed, and I am guilty of the same attitude. But it really, these recent spate of this very graphic case in Michigan of this teenager that was supplied with a gun by his parents, and he massacred some of his fellow schoolmates. He was a disturbed person with obvious mental disturbance. That sort of brought to, for me at least, in my interpretation, also in listening to, among other things, the Young Turks, Anna Kasparian and Cenk Uyghur's coverage of an interview with Chris Murphy, who is a Democratic senator from Connecticut. So the most famous school massacre, at least of sort of recent date, is the Sandy Hook massacre in Connecticut. And so the Connecticut delegation is more or less, though historically actually Connecticut was a location where gun manufacturers used to have their factories, that they have become more of advocates for gun control. But we don't really have any strong advocates in the federal government for really strong gun control. And so I'll put a link in the description box. This interview with Murphy at CNN, you got the sense that he's really just deferring to the filibuster. And the filibuster is the excuse to do nothing, okay, for both Democrats and Republicans, particularly for Democrats. And he is exposed in this interview as essentially saying, we have all the votes, right now to do something, but we won't because of the filibuster. And so that passivity, highlights the sort of the inaction of our our government in this area of increasing gun violence, and also and from the side of the judiciary now, the increasingly right-wing judiciary we have in the United States, that that gun holders, that gun owners and gun users, people who have a gun in their hands supposedly legally, or maybe even semi-legally, seem to have more rights than, as I said in the last video, than people without guns. In other words, they are entitled in some sense to do great damage and to kill people around them if on some whim and some idea that they have that they're under attack, or there's an accidental discharge of their weapon that they're carrying. And so this and they will essentially not be punished for this, and so most likely now there are signs that in this Michigan case that we may see maybe a turn in how these cases are prosecuted and adjudicated, but still the history, the recent history of the last several decades of just increasing indifference to the by politicians, in other words, virtual indifference, despite professions of politicians and also the general public, in some sense, as accepting, or parts of the public. I'm not saying the whole public. I mean, there is great support for common sense gun control regulation, but on the elite level, there is the political discourse is controlled by people who are not willing to sacrifice anything, to stick their neck out, to endanger themselves, because the people who they're opposing are, some of them, dangerous people, or many of them dangerous people. Dangerous because some of them are semi-criminals and have various forms of mental illness that don't inhibit their aggressive impulses, okay, and that having a gun makes your aggressive impulses all the more dangerous to other people. We all have aggressive impulses. We all have that capacity, or that the possibility, but the people who are in a state of mind where they don't have the capacity to control themselves, and furthermore they outfit themselves because of ideology, because of some kind of happenstance. They outfit themselves with deadly weapons. And so anyway, in this background, though, we have a general devaluation of life and of living, and of the living. So this is to be, in some sense, this is an anti-life politics. So it's anti, and so the iron, in a way, there should be a contestation in terms of the hegemonic. It should be a hegemonic struggle over the definition of what is pro-life, which hasn't happened, by the way, because the word pro-life is used to mean anti-abortion, when anti-abortionists are anti-life in terms of anti the life of mothers or future mothers or pregnant women, and they are in general, I mean, and as in tendency, and they're certainly not supporting the life supporting facilities of a developed country that, for instance, has childcare, has a pro-natalist policy overall, if they want to see more babies born. Okay, and so, but the support of this gun fetish and the wanton and uncontrolled collection, display and sometimes use of ever more powerful firearms puts them in an objectively anti-life position. So I think any economic progress that someone with a left perspective, a socialist, a social democratic, New Deal liberal perspective, which are kind of the or communist even, or anarchist, if you even want to talk about that sort of the ultra left positions in our this discourse. But anyway, anybody who has that orientation to society becoming a more hospitable place for working people, for poor people, for ordinary people, that not just hospitable, but life affirming, life enhancing. Anybody who believes that should be a fundamental concern of our public discourse, of our politics, of our the budgeting decisions of governments, of federal governments and state governments and city governments, they need to, at the base, as a fundamental macroethical, and that's and macroeconomic in a sort of a general sense, but certainly the ethical basis of any economic demand, you need to place a value on human life, a high value, not necessarily a monetary value, but you need to, through your actions, through your, including your politics, you need to combat anti-life. Okay, you need to say anti-life is not compatible with a truly pro-living politics, and you need to either change. Now, our Constitution, the Constitution of the United States, has this ambiguity built into it, or at least in its interpretation about the right to own a gun, and it's been, the Second Amendment is definitely misinterpreted by the current generation of gun fetishists and distorted. And it could be potentially, there could be a way to by, for instance, proposing legislation, senators and Congress people could propose that people, regulated people need to be a part of a regulated militia, but they need to define regulated militia with some form of legislation, so that and they could make the ownership of a gun an onerous responsibility, as it should be. Okay, a very onerous responsibility, rather than a opportunity for play. Okay, and this is where the childishness of gun fetishists come in, is that they are playing with, in a deadly way. I mean, I'm not in a threatening way, but they are still the account of this family in Oxford, Michigan, it seems as though they were playing with both their son's life, his mental health, and also with guns at the same time. And it was part of they were not fully cognizant. None of them were fully cognizant of the consequences of using or owning and using those weapons. And so I think it should be fairly easy to, someone should formulate a law that simply defines, well, what is a well-regulated militia, and what's our registry? Create a registry of regulated militias and regulate them. And so this is an area that I am not intimately. Again, I'm also a product of this sort of siloing of gun rights, and that I've been outside the silo of people who focus only on gun rights, or I'm sorry, gun control. But if someone hasn't endeavored to do it, they should. And I have other. I will return to this issue and the valuation of life, and also to the psychological and ethical background for actually taking steps. In other words, people taking action to doing something about our out of control violent culture, and are also out of control fetishization of weapons and of war. Okay, and so but anyway, I wanted to just sort of point out that it's not just a focus on the issue of, having or not having having violence or not having violence. It goes back to how much are we valuing living and having a life, and having and endeavoring to improve our lives through public policy, and also having a politics that follows from that. And right now, that politics seems entirely indifferent, or largely indifferent, with some few exceptions. Often they're the members of the squad, and Bernie Sanders, in my opinion, and occasionally a few other representatives who are at least starting in on this valuation of living and of life that I think is the basis for our making some progress in areas of in all the areas that we need to make progress, which are, some of which are trying to be addressed in the Build Back Better agenda in a very, 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 very cautious and very minimalistic way. But I think that there is a rich vein of political discourse that needs to be mined by politicians in trying to expose the anti-life and anti-progress and anti-human politics of those who are gun fetishists. And it needs to happen over and over again. It can't just be one person who doesn't have a very large platform talking about it. It needs to be something that circulates in society, that people get fed up with the status quo that accepts the anti-life politics of the gun fetishists. So anyway, I hope this video has been interesting and has raised some issues that are, provoke thought. And if you like it, please like the video. And if you also are you what's happening on Politics 2100 more generally, please subscribe to my channel. And also, if you have specific reactions to this content, please comment below, and I hope to see you in the next video.